Today is Tuesday, May 27th, 2025. This is Read Through the Bible.
Hi, everyone.
And this is our special Numbers recap episode.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So in other books, we have begun to do this and has got great reviews from you all who are listening, just in terms of taking one book of the Bible and in less than 15 minutes, kind of review it for you all.
Yep. So we're going to recap the whole book of Numbers today. This is Tuesday afternoon, so we did have a morning edition where we read Numbers 35 and 36.
So if you're in the habit of listening to these at night, you may have skipped an episode because we did two today.
Right.
So I would encourage you to go back and listen to chapters 35 and 36, which we did this morning. But here we're going to go through all of Numbers. And as we think about Numbers, the passage that comes to mind is 1 Corinthians chapter 10.
Right. Which turns Numbers, which is kind of a long, somewhat dry book, it turns Numbers into a very applicational book.
Yeah. So I'm going to read 1 Corinthians 10 for you. We're going to work through this to kind of give you a shade of what Numbers is all about.
And as you listen, and if you read along, you'll realize you're familiar with all of these things that it's talking about.
Okay, chapter 10, verse 1. 1 Corinthians 10:1. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud. That's like the cloud that moved around as the people
That guided them.
in
God's
the
glory and
wilderness.
presence.
And all passed through the sea, that's the Red Sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the spiritual food, that was the manna, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. It's difficult things to understand them there, but he's talking about the wilderness experience. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. So he's talking about these millions of people, most of them, like all but two.
Right.
God killed all of them except for
Joshua and
Joshua
Caleb.
and Caleb. That's what is being talked about here. And that is what we ought to pull away from Numbers. Like, wow, we have so many people, and God was pleased only with two of them.
Yeah. Verse 6 says, Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did.
Yeah, and this is why Numbers is written, I think. This is the New Testament application for Numbers. See the evil they craved, and let's not be like them.
Right.
And then it just passes through the history of the people of Israel and the wanderings. One story from Exodus, but many from Numbers.
Okay. Verse 7, Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play.
Probably the golden calf episode in Exodus 32.
Verse 8, We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day.
It's probably Numbers 25 and Phinehas in the rebellion at Peor.
Verse 9, We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents.
That story is told in Numbers 21.
Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer.
You think about
it happened many
times in the book of
times.
Numbers. Chapter 11, chapter 16, chapter 20 happened often.
Yeah. Verse 11. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come.
So as we read through Numbers, we ought to see their example of unbelief, not entering the land, and then all the things in which they did. They grumbled, complained, they're involved in sexual immorality and idolatry, and we ought not to be like them.
Right. If you look back at 7, 8, 9, and 10, it says, Do not be idolaters, do not indulge in sexual immorality, do not put Christ to the test, and do not grumble.
Yeah. And for some of you who might say, and I've heard people say this, if I was there, I would not have done those things. Well,
it was hard.
We probably would have done those things.
Yeah.
And so verse 12 speaks to you if you think, I wouldn't have done those things. Verse 12 says.
Okay, verse 12. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed, lest he fall.
Let's not be overconfident in our walk with Christ, but know that there is the way of escape.
Right. Verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it.
Yeah. So as these things tempt you, as you're tempted by sexual immorality, or you're tempted by idolatry and putting anything above God,
or tempted to grumble,
right? Just know that God is faithful. Seek him, and he'll give you the way of escape. Therefore, 1 Corinthians 10:14, my beloved, flee from idolatry. Let us flee from these things we see in Numbers, the whole
The
book.
whole book.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through all 36 chapters, giving you a little bit of a structure. And really the aim is maybe summarizing the chapter in maybe 4, 5, 6 words, or maybe even one word. Just
1 to 5.
yeah.
How about-
And what you can do is if you have space open at the end of, in your book, at the end of Numbers 36, like this might be a good place to write it down, just even summary. You can stop the podcast and you can summarize it as you go along as we think of these things, just really trying to summarize it well. Okay, so 1 through 36, the big 2 chapters are chapters 1 and chapters 26, which are both census.
And that's what Numbers is. It's counting the people.
Yep.
And they count them at the beginning of the wanderings in the wilderness. And then in 26, they're counting it at the end of the wanderings in the wilderness when a whole new generation has risen up.
Yep. So chapters 1 and 26 are like, circle those, frame those out. That would be the best thing to do. Also, in terms of travel, we're traveling from Mount Sinai, traveling to Paran, and then the plains of Moab. And the travel takes place in chapters 10 through 12, when they arrive at Paran, and then 20 through 21 is when they travel the plains of
So
Moab.
chapter 10 and chapter 20, they start travels.
Yep.
They do other travels, but we're not told any of the details about those. But those are the 2 sections of traveling.
Yep. And then the rest is really just kind of filled with stories or
Stories,
instructions
laws.
or everything. So chapter 1, chapter 26 are the census, and then they travel in 10 through 12 and travel in 20 through 21.
And 13 and 14 are really bad, and that's where things turn for the worse, and they can't go into the land.
Yeah, and that's
for a
right
long
after
time.
10 through 12 is their first travel, right? The travel to Paran, which is just right across the Jordan, ready to take the promised land. 13 and 14, they fail to do that. Therefore, the generation has to die out, and they die out, and then chapter 26, we see the updated census. So that's kind of the broad overview of the key chapters. We're just going to zip through here of every chapter, kind of taking our drone look at just even your summaries. And maybe on your summary page, if you want, you just kind of highlight on each of your summaries what might be the most important things as you wrote them down. So here we go. We're 7.5 minutes into this podcast, so we got to zip through here. Okay, so chapter 1. We see the census.
Okay.
Chapter 2, we see...
The camp arrangement.
Yeah, this is where everybody would camp. Chapters 3 and 4, you can kind of put these 2 together. It's really traveling duties of Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, remember, those are the sons of
Aaron.
Levi, of Aaron.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I actually wrote GKM.
Gershon, Kohath, and Merari.
Yeah.
Okay. But those are names to know. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. You should know those names.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They're not the sons of Aaron. They're
The sons of Levi.
yeah, sons of Levi, and yeah. So
Okay. Verse 5, chapter 5, the test of adultery, the adultery test. It's like the big thing in that chapter. And that was, remember, where you had to drink dusty water to see whether you were an adulteress or not.
okay, chapter 6, Nazirite vow.
Yeah. And that's where you had nothing from the vine or a razor or dead people touch them. So it's just kind of these rules they're setting up. Chapter 7, there's like the 12 days of Christmas, right? The 12 tribes, 12 days of the dedicatory offerings, dedication offerings.
Yeah,
is what chapter 7
I wrote
is.
dedication offerings 12 days.
Okay. Chapter 8, cleansing of the Levites is what I got. Okay.
And
chapter 9.
9 is the Passover year 2.
Okay. So this is the first time the Passover is celebrated as a memorial Passover, because the first time it was celebrated was in Exodus when the actual Passover happened. But here is where it's celebrated, first month, 14th day, as a memorial. Okay? So these are sort of the things that they're just arranging themselves, getting ready.
Getting ready to travel.
Yep, in chapter 10, the trumpets call them to set out for Paran. Okay, and so they are setting out for Paran. Paran is a Greek word or I guess a Hebrew word here, it just means beyond the Jordan. This is on the east side of the Jordan. So they head out for Paran. Chapter 11.
Quail judgment.
Further complaint, yeah. And we said quail judgments here because that's unique. Like chapter 11, like grumbling isn't unique. They grumble all over the place, but this is the judgment of the quail. People weep for meat, and he gives them quail.
Right. So you kind of have to know what's going on in the chapter for these short summaries to make sense. But quail judgment should be enough to kind of trigger your memory of what happened there.
In chapter 12, I got Miriam and Aaron complain. Yeah, so complaint. That was in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. It says, don't complain, don't grumble as some of them did. Often. Okay, 13 and 14, these are the key chapters in terms of, because they're right here now at Paran. They're right ready to enter the land. And 13.
12, spy out Canaan.
Yep. And then in chapter 14 is the 40-year punishment. That for the next 40 years you're going to wander, and everyone 20 years old and up are going to die. So that's really the turning point in the book of Numbers. And then we have chapter 15. It speaks about then when you enter the land, sacrifices for entering the land. Though some other things are mentioned, you might want to remember that someone killed for gathering wood on the Sabbath. That's a very small story, but it's a very unique story.
Right.
Okay, 16.
Korah's rebellion.
Yeah, or Korah, Dathan, and Abiram rebel. Like
That's
those,
when the ground swallowed them up.
Yep. Or Korah's ground judgment or something. But Korah's rebellion is often how it's talked about. 17.
Aaron's rod buds.
Yep. And that
was to prove his authority and stop
the people from grumbling. Okay, chapter 18.
Food portions for Levites.
This talks about how just the Levites and their families are supported by the sacrifices and the foods they've been given. Okay, chapter 19. There's one key thing in this chapter. It's a sacrifice
of the red heifer.
The red heifer sacrifice. Remember that the ashes were given to cleanse people who touched dead bodies. Okay, 20. Bad chapter. So what bad happens?
So Miriam and Aaron die, and Moses strikes the rock.
Yep, you got to know when he struck the rock, he couldn't enter the land.
Right.
Because he was told to speak to the rock, and he struck it. 21 is the bronze serpent and Avon.
And I also wrote Sihon and Og.
Yeah, because Sihon, king of Heshbon, Og, king of Bashan. If you know those names and where they're from, they come up often in the Bible.
Right, those were significant battle victories for the Israelites.
Yep, but in 20 and 21, again, that's where they traveled, and so they're off traveling, and so it makes sense this. They traveled, they beat Sihon, king of Heshbon, Og, king of Bashan. But the bronze serpent, real crucial story, comes to 21 as well. Okay, chapter 22.
Balaam's donkey.
Balaam's donkey's in there. Yep. Balak summons Balaam.
Okay.
And Balaam's donkey. Chapter 23. Here we go.
This is hard. I wrote 2 times Balaam blesses Israel.
Yep, I think it's right.
Blesses I.
Balaam blesses Israel 2x is what I got. And then chapter 24, I've got Balaam blesses Israel 1 time, and Balaam curses the nations. It's really long summary.
And I have Balaam's 3rd and 4th oracles.
There you go. It's 3. So he blesses Israel 3 times, 23 and 24, and curses the nations once in 24. Okay, chapter 25, Phinehas.
Yeah.
Like, you remember that his zeal.
If you know the story, then you know who Phinehas is. And he stopped the plague of immorality and idolatry.
Yep. Okay, so 26 is the census. We talked about that before. And 27, we have Zelophehad's daughters, or like you like to call them.
Zelos girls.
Zelos girls. Okay.
And Joshua. This is when Joshua was commissioned to take over.
Yep. 28, 29, we put those both together. This is talking about the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly offerings. And like 29 has a 7th month offerings. 28 ends with some of the Passover, the spring offerings. So lump those together would be helpful. 30 is one word.
Vows.
31 is vengeance against the Midianites, taken like war. Okay, 32 is
Reuben, Gad, half of Manasseh's request.
Yep, and if you remember, they requested land east of the Jordan, which they were okay with, but they had to fight. Chapter 33
is review the journeys.
Yep, all the cities they traveled in as they traveled around. And chapter 34 is the borders of the land that they were to conquer. Chapter 35 we read this morning. It is the
6 cities of refuge.
Yep, Levites given 48 cities, 6 of which are cities of refuge. And then chapter 36.
Zealous girls.
Zealous girls, finally. But in here, it's that how the girls need to marry those within the tribe of Manasseh, so the inheritance doesn't go out of that.
Okay.
Okay.
There we have it.
Yep.
The Book of Numbers.
Flee from idolatry. So it's being talked about. All right. We will see you tomorrow morning.
Okay.
In the Book of Mark.
Yes.
Okay. You will be relieved. We're going to get some stories of Jesus. Much easier, much lighter, much more hope-giving.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.